All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. We're a little bit behind, so we'll probably just go through to 12 o'clock, if that's okay with everybody here. This panel is on how compliance regulations get made, and we have David Mortman as our moderator here, a repeat speaker at Source. He's put together a great panel from quite a different number of different regulatory requirements, and I'm going to let him introduce his panel. So, David.
Thanks, Chris. So we're going to talk, I have a panel of experts here who have been involved in one way or another in how various compliance regulations we have to deal with on a daily basis get made. I'll let my panelists introduce themselves, starting with Katie Moussouris, who is Skyped in from Kuala Lumpur.
Thanks. So I'm Katie Moussouris. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
All right. So I'm a senior security strategist with Microsoft, and I am actually, at this moment, in Malaysia. And I'm here for the ISO meeting, ironically enough. So I'm working on an ISO draft standard on responsible vulnerability disclosure.
Thank you, Katie. Jack?
Hi, I'm Jack Daniel, and I shouldn't be a compliance guy, but compliance is like rained on our parade so much that I am. I'm actually a network and systems admin who's grown into a whole bunch of other jobs, but that's what I do. I fix things that mangle our packets, but I can't even do that without compliance getting in my way.
And which compliance framework are you going to talk about?
MAS 201 CMR 17 particularly. It was an interesting introduction that I got dragged into that.
Cool, thanks. Mike?
My name is Mike Dahn. I've been involved in the payment card industry for about 7 or 8 years now. Did a lot of training and education. If you've met a QSA, I've probably trained them, and also trained about 10,000 different merchants, service providers, acquirers for a large payment brand.
And my name is Dave Lewis. I am the Information Security Officer for a critical infrastructure company in Ontario, Canada. And I've actually been working in and around the power system industry now for roughly about 8 years.
Cool, thanks, Sue. And I actually have nothing to do with any compliance regulation except for having to implement it at various companies. And it's been tough, so I thought it'd be kind of interesting to get people's perspective on how this stuff happens and the realities versus the perception. So first I would like our panelists to tell me about how they got involved with this whole compliance thing to begin with, and why they're still involved, and then we can get into some stories about how things actually happen. Katie?
Okay, you all sound a little bit like Hubert right now, so I don't know if I sound any better to you. But we'll try and make this work. So we've actually been trying this all week with the plume of doom, the volcano grounding half of the ISO delegates. So we've had intermittent problems with trying this, so we'll see how well it works here. Essentially, how I got roped into doing this ISO thing was because I was a subject matter expert on vulnerability disclosure, and when we heard that there was going to be a draft international standard on it, first thing we thought was, why? There were certainly enough guidelines out there. So the way that ISO works is that people vote by national body, and only about 4 of all the participating national bodies voted against creating an ISO standard. The United States was one of those 4. But since other countries thought it would be valuable and useful, it did get passed in to be a work item for the ISO group. So once that happened and it was going to be a work item, well, we decided to work on it. So I got tapped to be the subject matter expert for the U.S. national body on vulnerability disclosure, participating in the ISO process. So that's how it happened to me.
So now that you've been involved with this for a while, do you still think it's a good idea?
Well, define good.
Are you ready to come home yet?
What?
Are you ready to come home yet?
Oh, well, I'm always ready to come home from the road because, I hate leaving my family. But No, it's been a bumpy ride, all told, and especially this week. It's been particularly dramatic, and one would not think that standards meetings would be dramatic, because there's a whole lot of formality and, old men yelling at clouds, and it's pretty, it's pretty dry stuff, the stuff of standards, but the emotions that are involved, the territorialism, the politics, both actual politics, because this is on the score of national bodies, so these are literally nations, coming together to try to make an agreement, but the usual type of politics going on. So it's never dull, I can tell you that much. And yes, I am quite ready to come home.
Thanks. Jack?
So my path into dealing with compliance, more than tangentially, was a few years ago. People started talking about this pending Massachusetts regulation 201 CMR 17. I would occasionally touch people that were dealing with PCI assessments or other things in my role as a support engineer for Astara. People would need help figuring out what's going on. But 201 CMR 17 was here in Massachusetts, and it was the regulatory and prescriptive component of our breach disclosure law. And so I read an article in I don't remember where, but I looked at it and said, oh, that sounds kind of interesting, but it seems odd. And then I found a blog post about it from someone who seemed like they ought to know, and the two contradicted considerably. So then I took the leap of faith and wound my way through and found the actual document, read all 6 pages of it, and discovered both articles were substantially wrong, and that the subject matter experts hadn't read 6 pages. And so I thought that was it, but I made a few comments, a couple of blog posts, spoke about it in a couple of groups, and the next thing, I kept getting dragged deeper and deeper into it, and it was a lot of misinformation about it. And then I realized that, wow, that's true of everything that I look at, from PCI to, you name it, that there are a lot of people spouting things, and people are taking advice. My customers are taking advice from people who don't know what they're actually talking about.
That's kind of scary.
Yeah.
Mike?
Is this a particular question, or was there
I'm just going to
experience?
you're going to talk about sort of how you got involved in this, and why you're doing it today.
Yeah, certainly. I got involved in it a long time ago when I was working for a card brand, and they were looking for someone who had actually implemented the particular standard to help train and educate a lot of other people. And I'm still involved in it today because, when it comes to the payment card industry, when it comes to compliance, the PCI standard is one that tends to cut across multiple organizations, and I still find that a lot of people need that kind of level of education. I did definitely want to echo what Katie mentioned in terms of the emotion of the politics and territorialism that exists. These types of things exist in every type of organization, and unfortunately they exist in many different associations and such, and so you see different types of people making plays, right? Not necessarily within the group itself, but specifically, people that say, I've got certain feedback, I want it changed a certain way, right? Everyone has their own way they want things changed. Actually, Josh Corman, one of the people in the audience, he asked a question which made me start to think is, what are the top 3 things that you would think of to really improve the regulatory space? I think those 3 things really are, number 1 is education. I found so often, and still participating in it today, I find that people choose inaction over action when they don't know specifically what to do or what is meant by a particular item. So education is super key. The second thing I think is flexibility of controls, right? Regardless of what the controls are, we see that we know that there are different influences in them, right? And so of course we need different types of flexibility controls. We need these controls to be able to apply to multiple different types of organizations. So they have to be maintained flexible. And the third thing that we really need is transparency and increased threat data so we can do better risk modeling. I mean, ultimately at the end of the day, these controls are going to evolve and change, and we're hoping that they're going to evolve and change based on the emerging threat and attack patterns that we're seeing in the industry, right? Specific to each industry. And one of the things I find interesting as well, and I'll shut up, is that the threats and risks that exist today, right, are very specific to an industry. So power and energy, very different from payment card industry, right? Very different from personal data protection and things like that. And I think that that's something that we have to stay aware of when we're looking at all these different types of data and when we're